My name's Brandon Roberts, a developer advocate at Narwhal, and this video is about NX, an open source build framework that helps developers build applications at scale using a monorepo. This video walks through building an application that lists Star Wars characters using React and shows some of the additional tooling that NX provides. So let's get right into it. So to create a workspace, we'll type npx create NX workspace. We'll call this SW.org for Star Wars org. And we'll set the package manager to yarn. So here I'm prompted with a preset to use, which NX provides many presets out of the box to set up, whether it be a single application or an application with a backend attached to it. I'm going to choose the React preset to generate a React application inside this workspace. As I mentioned, these other presets available, ones for Next.js or React and Express together, or even web components. So it's going to ask for application name. I'm going to choose my app, and I'll choose the default styles for this video here. But as you can see, there's other options available. Also have the option to connect your workspace to NX Cloud, which provides shared caching across workspaces, and also has a free tier, but it's not required for the purposes of this video. So while that's running, this is going to generate a new NX workspace, scaffold out a new React application with modern tooling that includes Jest for unit tests and Cypress for end-to-end tests. So it is finished installing the necessary dependencies and creating the workspace. And if you haven't gone through before, you can also check out the React tutorial to create your own application from scratch. So we'll go into the Star Wars org directory and open up VS Code. So to start up the application, we're going to open a new terminal here, and I'll use the NX serve command to start up the project, and that will just run the my app project on localhost 4200. So now that we have that up and running here, it brings up the application in the browser, and this is just the template that's used for new projects. Welcome to my app, which is the app name we chose, and some information here, information about our Egghead course on scaling React development, like I mentioned before, the tutorial, and more information about NX Cloud. So the next steps are some things you can do with NX to accelerate your development, or use some of these pre-configured functionality in NX. We're going to go to the Star Wars API, and this is at Star Wars API.dev or swappy.dev, and we can see the this is the API that we'll be using to query data from, and it gives you a lot of information about people and characters and other information that's associated with the Star Wars franchise. So when you're creating these applications in a monorepo, you want to keep the application itself as thin as possible, and move a lot of the business logic for your application into libraries, as I mentioned before, because we have applications here and libraries here. So as this is just a template application, we'll just start with what's there and work our way up to generating a library and displaying that list there. So generating libraries is done with the generate command, which comes with the NX CLI. What we're going to do is generate a feature library, and feature libraries are used to display UI to the user, which could include routing information and could use other libraries that are just used as shared components. So to generate a feature library, we're going to use the NX generate command. And we're going to call this feature library people. And so that went and generated a library under people. And this has some standard files that are generated with each library that you would use for a React component, and along with the spec file and CSS file that is already set up and kind of wired together for you. I also could have done this using NX Console, which is another tool that provides all the functionality of the NX CLI and this has support for VS Code and WebStorm. So I could go to the generate here and choose our React library, which is what comes configured with the React preset, or I can use some of these other generators within NX Console. So let's take a quick look at that. So let's say I wanted to create another library called person. So this lets you preview what you would run using this generator before it actually runs. So I can kind of see it in a dry run mode without actually changing the file system yet. That's just another thing that NX Console provides. So if we go back and look through the people library, we see we have a pretty standard React component. We have the people props that are passed in, and welcome to the people is just standard template that's scaffolded out for the component there. Now these are just used for displaying UI to the user, but what we want to do is to separate the UI and also separate the way we fetch data for the list of Star Wars characters. And this is done using a data access library. The way you generate these is the same, even though they serve different purposes. A data access library is where functionality for fetching and storing data for a feature exists. So any services to manage the data are placed in this library. So building applications could be data access libraries that are used across multiple features. So I'm going to close this. I'm going to generate another library called data access. And because this is a small application, we can use the general names here. But if you were building up a large application, you would have your own naming conventions for these data access libraries. But you can put data access in the name and then prefix that with the name of the item or collection that you're managing. So each one of these generated a library, and you can also use custom generators similar to the library generator inside this workspace itself to give you more flexibility about generating libraries and components or whatever the case may be inside of the workspace. So let's update the data access library to fetch characters from the Star Wars API. So if we look through the documentation here, we want to get the people from the Star Wars API. So we're going to go to the people section here, and we just want to get all the people resources. So we're just going to get the general list. We'll bump that up just a little. So that use the people resource for an individual. You can use this for an individual person or character within the universe, but the /people itself is the one that we want to use. And it gives you an example of the data that you get back here. And there's also has pagination within this example. So we'll look at adding that also. So if we go into the data access library, and we have a data access.tsx file here. Open that up, and we have this standard, like I said, library information here, but we're going to update this with the information about the characters that we're going to be fetching. So I'm going to clear that, and we're going to come here here and use, and for the sake of copying, I'm going to copy some of these models out that match the structure of the data that we expect to get back from the API and how we're going to use that data. So here I'm just creating an interface for the person, which includes the birth year information and some of the other data that was there. And I'm going to model the response that comes back for from that data, which gives us the count, the next, the previous, and the results. Next, I'm going to use a custom hook within this data access library that will go and fetch the people. So we're going to create a use people hook, and gives us a list of the people and sets those persons using the use state to an empty array. And then once we fetch those, we're going to set that data, set the people to that array there. So we'll save that. Now I'm going to go and update the people feature in the people.tsx to list out the characters. So we have our people.css, and we're going to import the use people hook. And whenever you're generating new libraries, you may have to reload your VS Code or reload your editor just so it can recognize where this is coming from. But I was able to import the use people hook that we created in the data access library. And now I will update the people component to use that hook. So I'm going to use if I go back to the data access, I'm having the use people hook, and I'm passing in the page number, and it's going to fetch those results for this particular set of data. So if I come back into the people component, I use the use people hook, and I just have a standard template here that uses the Star Wars people and iterates over each one of the people that I return and displays that in the list. And then I export the people function, which is pretty standard behavior. So now if I go back to my app and the app.tsx, and I want to replace the app template with the people component. So I'll go through, import the people from the sworg/people library, and then update the app to just display the list of or to use the people component, and then use the style, still use the styles.app that were defined there. So I'll save those. Going to stop and restart the development server. So now that we can see, we have a list of characters here. As we mentioned before, the list of characters here is simple, but the business logic and data is kept in the library. So as your applications grow, the number of libraries will grow along with it, but the application itself remains relatively small. NX knows about the dependencies in your application through the imports. So if we go back to the data access, here we're only importing use effect and use state from React. So we don't have any internal dependencies in this library. The people library does depend on the data access library, and the application itself does depend on the people library. So you can see how those dependencies are drawn there, but you don't have to track those dependencies manually. So if we go here and use the NX dependency graph, we can run NX dep graph, and see of the current state of the workspace. So here, this is, like I said, when we have the My App, it shows all the projects, the My App, the My ETE app, along with the 2 libraries that we generated here. And this gives you a way to, you can check these projects and bring them into the application itself. So if I choose that, it updates dynamically. I can select all, and we can see the relationship between the application, the people library, and the data access. And even the My App, the EDE app, which doesn't have any explicit dependencies on the app itself, but we can add that connection between those 2 applications. And that was done when the application was generated in the index.json file, where we have the My App ETE and the implicit dependencies of the application. So the My App ETE implicitly depends on My App, so that connection is there when we're using the affected commands. So you can also see what projects are impacted by a given change in the dependency graph. So I'm going to commit these changes. Feature add update people list. And so all those changes are committed. Now let's say I go and make a change to the app, the application itself. And before I just ran the NX depth graph command. So this time I want to run the NX affected depth graph command. So that's going to look for the projects that were affected by a given change and show that on the dependency graph. So now we can see that My App was affected and My App ETE was implicitly affected by the change to My App. So even if I select these other projects, you can see that if I wanted to run certain commands or certain tasks against those projects using the affected commands, I wouldn't need to do those because those projects aren't affected by this given change. So if I take that a step further and I go into the libraries and I change the data access, we can see through the graph that running the affected depth graph again, we can see that now there are more affected projects. The data access was affected, the people depends on that, the My App depends on that, and the EDE app depends on that. The next step would be to look at building the affected projects in the workspace. The next command is the NX affected build. So if I run NX affected build, it's going to look at the projects in the workspace and build those projects. In this case, it's just My App. It's the only application we have here. So we ran the build target for that application. And this is shorthand. So this is an alias for something that's a little more verbose. But if I wanted to run this in a different way, I can run NX affected target. Target equals build. And those build additional targets are defined in the workspace.json, but come pre-configured. So we've looked at generating applications and libraries. We've looked at how to break the application down into smaller pieces. And we can also use the affected commands to do things like build and test and lint those projects independently. So along with the affected commands, NX also supports computation caching, where you never run the same computation twice. So looking at the My App as an example, if I run NX build My App again, you see we're instantly going to get the build output from the cache, and it shows you in the output here that it output from the cache instead of running that task. And as we can see, we have the dist my apps artifacts there that were produced by the build. So even if I go and delete that folder, I run nx build my app again, it's going to pull from the cache and display exactly what was used when I ran that command, and also place those artifacts exactly where they were. So this computation is all done locally, but as I mentioned before, it can be distributed and extended to the rest of your organization.